Welcome to our sixth Chai Time, and we've got a great panel this week, and we're discussing a very important topic. It's my birthday weekend, as some of you may or may not know, so I decided to treat myself to a swim this morning, an early morning swim. I went to the River Cam, and we were just discussing how young or old people look to their photos on LinkedIn, etc. And I'm sort of heading towards my 50s, although not quite there yet. But I hadn't used my wetsuit for the last 10 years or so. And it took my friend about 5 minutes to actually zip it up behind me. So although I went for an open water swim in the River Cam, which I could probably do with a few antibiotics at the end of that swim, but I have decidedly, probably in the lockdown, probably been drinking too much of my homebrew cider. But I want to thank the panelists of coming on today and sparing their time. It's a really important topic. And I don't want to talk any further because I want to give maximum time to this great group of people. So I'm going to hand over to Aleks, who stepped in at the last minute to be chair. This is not Erin at all. It's a different, so this is Aleks, and he'll introduce himself. I will now make myself scarce. And I'll come on at the end.
Thank you, Sunil, for inviting me and the panel. My name is Aleks Engel. I'm a partner with Novo Holdings. I'm based in Boston in lockdown. I managed to do a self-brewed chai here for the event. I presume that people in Europe are on to other drinks, but it's really a pleasure to have this informal discussion. And this is clearly one of the things that I'm going to take out of this crisis is that having these informal conversations with folks sort of beyond your own office is really easy and a tremendously fun and perhaps also enlightening thing for all of us to engage in. So we have a great panel here of 4 folks really representing the full value chain of the antibiotics industry. The theme here for today is going to be humility and opportunity. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about that. But we'd love for each of our 4 panelists to introduce themselves.
Aleks, just before you do that, you didn't introduce Novo and what you do at Novo. So I think it'd be good to...
Sure, yeah, apologies. So Novo Holdings is a life science investment firm, and we have about 130 portfolio companies. We started a fund specifically dedicated to investing in novel antibiotics 2 years ago, into which we've made 8 investments, one of which is Spiro, and we have so one representative here on the call. And I've been leading that effort from the beginning. So enough about me. I'd like to introduce Ken Bradley from Roche, Ankit Mahadevia, Ajay Mistry, and Paul Finn. And so let me turn over the word to Ken first.
All right, thanks, Aleks. Yeah, so I'm Ken Bradley. I'm the Global Head for Discovery of Infectious Disease at Roche, based in Basel, Switzerland. I oversee the antibiotics programs as well as antiviral programs here, and very, very pleased to be a participant in this. And as some of you may know or may not know, Roche is very dedicated right now to anti-infectives, and as part of that, multi-drug resistant gram-negative bacteria is primary for what we're after. So very pleased to be part of this panel and pleased to be part of this great group attacking this really critical problem for society.
Ankit? Ankit, you're on mute.
Thanks, Sunil, for the opportunity, and good afternoon to everybody in Europe. Good morning in the States. I'm Ankit Mahadevia, Chief Executive Officer of Spiro Therapeutics, which is a NASDAQ-traded company with dedicated to new unmet needs in infection. We have a clinical stage pipeline treating different serious unmet needs in infection, an oral carbapenem in phase 3, an oral agent for a rare infectious disease called NTM and heading to phase 2, and an oral or an IV polymyxin agent for seriously ill patients with multi-drug resistant infections in phase 1. We are humbled and honored to be continuing our mission to treat serious unmet needs in infection, especially now.
Ajay?
Thanks, Aleks. So my name is Ajay Mistry. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Biotech, a startup based in the UK. So what we're doing is we're using systems biology and machine learning and wet lab science to model the processes involved in biosynthesis of various pathways. One of our key projects is modeling E. coli. So we're making a wholesale model of E. coli. And we're using that knowledge, that deep knowledge, to find non-intuitive drug targets and then working towards developing drugs against those targets. So we've got some early stage assets against these first-in-class targets. And yeah, we're very excited to be part of this, this great need.
And Paul?
Hi, thanks, Aleks. I'm Paul Finn. I'm the CEO of Oxford Drug Design, which is a biotech company which spun out from the chemistry department at the university a good few years ago now. We have a deep expertise in computer-aided drug design and the application of novel methods for preclinical drug discovery. And we use those methods to advance our pipeline of antibacterial drug discovery projects. We're focused on projects where there's a novel target and where we have the opportunity to develop compounds that can treat multi-drug resistant gram-negative infections. That's what we do.
Phenomenal. I think, as you heard, we really are representing our industry from many different great points of view. But let me start off by talking a little bit about the problem at hand first off. And clearly, infectious disease has come to the forefront. The average age in both Europe and the US in 1850, or the average lifespan, was 36 years. And our progress since then has to a great degree been from better hygiene and better infectious disease drugs, both of which is sort of what we're all about these days. And what we're really experiencing is a single pathogen kicking our rears here with COVID. But a couple of years ago, we had Candida auris, we've had Ebola, we've had SARS, MERS, etc. Any one of those could have evolved into something much bigger, and we just don't know. So the critical thing for us in all of this, I think, that we're needing to learn is preparedness. And I like to talk about the problem of antimicrobial resistance as the problem of the slowly boiling frog. So what we have now with COVID is the frog, or all of us, being dropped into a pot of boiling water, and suddenly we're all reacting immediately and with great vigor and throwing trillions of dollars at the problem and its ramifications. Antimicrobial resistance is also a pandemic, probably on similar size and scope, but it's been going on for decades, and as a consequence, our reaction hasn't been as swift. But it is allowing us to see this in a new light, given that we've all been scolded now from being dropped in this pot of boiling water. And that's frankly been hopefully healthy for all of us to really look at the situation we're in with new urgency to get prepared, and also to use that as a serious opportunity. It is really a kick in the pants. And I think we have here in this panel folks that are beginning to look at all of this in a very new light. So I think the opportunity at hand here are at least threefold. One is that we're beginning to view the market differently. What we've been in is a situation that's frankly been unsustainable for a very long time, where folks have lost money. I think Ankit may be one of the few that have not, but I have, at least, in the spirit of humbleness here, despite making some money with Ankit. So one thing is look at the market in new ways. Secondly, look at this with very new approaches. And in that vein, I think we have at least a couple of companies here that are looking to use really very different tools to get at this and to look for mechanisms and targets that nobody's done before. And then third, there is certainly also an opportunity for reimbursement reform and changing the basic infrastructure for how we're rewarding people that are helping society be prepared for this slow-moving tsunami that we're all experiencing. So that's roughly the setup that I think we're up against. And in that regard, it is a really exciting time to be in the space. And really, I urge all of you to think about how can we look at this problem from new angles. I think we're all humbled. We're all very much listening to each other. And small ideas can be molded into what's really going to save a lot of lives in the future. So with that, I would love to start my first round of questions to Ken Bradley from Roche. And it really is about, Ken, what is your strategy for the space? We saw that you have made an option deal with Forge not long ago. We also know you had an arrangement with BARDA from 2016. And so what does that mean to you today?
Great, thanks, Alex. Yeah, maybe I can start with the basis for our strategy. And really, it's all about novelty. You know, as we all know, there hasn't been a new class of antibiotics to treat gram-negative bacteria in more than 50 years. And so this we see is first and foremost our goal. You know, that there's been a lot of great chemistry that's been done on the molecules that were discovered during the golden age of antibiotics in the 50s and 60s. And still some important advances that help us to continue to battle resistance as it emerges. But we see that what is really needed at this point in time is what we refer to as resetting the clock on resistance, a novel mechanism of action, novel chemical scaffolds that would really be able to help us avoid pre-existing resistance mechanisms. And what we're referring to is a ushering in of a platinum age, if you will. If the golden age was the 50s and 60s, we're looking forward to the platinum age in the very, very near future. And we want to be part of that here at Roche. What we're going after in terms of these, as I mentioned before, are the WHO or CDC priority pathogens, the gram-negative specifically, for where we see multi-drug resistance is really a key problem and a high unmet need for patients. And the growing threat, as you said, perhaps a more silent pandemic, but one that's just as real. If I come back to how we really think about enacting this and acting on the strategy, as you said, we have a deal with BARDA, and that's still active, and that's very important for us. And as you said, beyond the technical challenge of finding novel antibiotics, there's also a market challenge. And push incentives such as the Novo Repair Fund, such as BARDA, such as CARB-X, we see is very, very important, not just for Roche, but also for the ecosystem as a whole, right? A lot of innovation happens around the world in biotechs and small, medium-sized enterprise. And we rely on that being big pharma. We have our own internal activities, but we also rely on the innovation that happens outside of our walls. As you mentioned, we've just signed an option deal with Forge. And so making sure that there's a vibrant ecosystem of innovation to tackle this really, really important problem is something that we see as incredibly important.
Thank you, Ken. I'm just going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Sure.
Can we expect more Forge-like deals from you?
Well, I think we're always looking, and we're ready to act if and when we see something that is appropriate for us. I should also highlight that we do have a deal that a couple of years ago we signed with Warp Drive Bio, and that then was purchased by Ginkgo, and a company in Boston. And so that's also an active collaboration that we have ongoing right now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ken. I see a question coming in on the commercial viability. But before I ask that question of you, I'd actually like to turn exactly that question over to Ankit. And so my question for you, Ankit, is as a company, as you mentioned, you have an oral carbapenem in last phases of development and soon to be commercialized. Given the difficulty of companies creating commercial success over the last, call it 5 years, how do you view the market these days, and what are you doing differently to set a different path for yourself?
Thanks, Alex. That's a great question. And I would echo your thoughts and Ken's. There's never been a more important and better time to be in infectious disease. And to the points that Ken made, the way that we think about our approach to infection, when we started, we envisioned building, a leading entity in infectious disease. And we think about it in 3 important ways. The first is, as you know, to build the base of the company on commercially sustainable antibiotics. And our lead program, tebipenem HBr, is an oral carbapenem. Just in the US alone, there's 2 million patients that have a need for oral therapy, especially now where admission to the hospital to receive IV antibiotics for infections that are not life-threatening is life-threatening in and of itself potentially because of COVID-19. And the possibility to have a carbapenem strength medicine that can be delivered for seriously ill patients outpatient is incredibly important. And so given the breadth of that opportunity, 2 million patients in the US alone taking acute therapy, we see the path to sustainability there. Secondly, as we think about the pipeline, we've also invested in sustainability there, focusing on a rare infectious disease, 720. And there it's an orphan population worldwide that takes chronic therapy to manage their disease. And we have what could be the first oral novel mechanism agent for NTM. So with that as the base, we then think about comprehensively our responsibility to commit to an approach to infection. So in collaboration with partners like the Gates Foundation, the Department of Defense, Everest Medicine in China, we develop 720 for tuberculosis. And we're also advancing SPR206, which is an IV medicine for highly resistant infections. So at 100,000 feet, Alex, we are investing in medicines that are sustainable with or without incentives, and then leveraging the platform that we've built to translate novel medicines efficiently to fulfill a commitment to global public health. And as we look in the long term, we think that'll position us well to be part of the solution, both in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of thinking of new ideas that, to Ken's point, could put us into the platinum age.
I like the word platinum age.
I hope you didn't copyright it, Ken, because I might borrow that from you.
And by the way, Ankit, in terms of your 720 program, I mean, we're seeing a lot of numbers in the news these days about number of deaths and number of infections from COVID. And the numbers I've seen on tuberculosis, for which your 720 program is targeting, is 10 million infections per year and 1.8 million deaths per year. It is astonishing. It is way bigger than all of the other things combined. And this is something that, very few companies are targeting. So very good. One extra question for you, Ankit, which is, with an oral therapy, you still need to promote it. And given certain access issues, certainly acute in the short term, given ability, are there technologies that you're seeing that could be helpful for your commercial efforts to really go to market in a different way?
Absolutely. We have seen, we have the good fortune of being on deck should we be successful with our phase 3. So we've been able to look at how COVID has affected companies and how they've adapted. We've observed a couple of things. One is that digital platforms have been effective in engaging our physician colleagues. Number two is that we have seen companies, as they've begun to sort of recover from the initial shock of COVID, find ways to get medicine to patients. I think unmet need is a major driver too. There is definitely a bifurcation in our observation between those medicines that patients absolutely have to have and those that they could potentially do without. I think the other thing that we're observing, which is both frightening for patients and maybe an opportunity, is that even for serious infections like appendicitis or acute coronary syndrome, patients are just not going to care institutions. So I think that companies that have been able to shift, for example, to self-injection or shift to delivering their medicines outside of a healthcare institution have actually seen growth. And the reason is I just don't think the way we care for patients will ever be the same. I'll give an anecdote. My wife's almost 100-year-old grandmother had what I think, I've been out of medical training many years, was a deep vein thrombosis. And normally we'd take her in to be imaged because, 100 years old with a respiratory condition, and we didn't. We gave her, oral anticoagulants and crossed our fingers. Fortunately, she's okay. But look, I think that this kind of issue is being played the world over right now, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Phenomenal, and great to have a 100-year-old family member.
Good genes on my wife's side.
Exactly. That's good. But really also, that those innovations that you're using in the commercial marketplace is what I think our next speaker, Ajay, you guys are really embracing fully, and so is Paul. But I think, at least from our side as a life science investor, we have seen these new computational methods and artificial intelligence, frankly, proving themselves in several instances. I think, as everyone, you probably are slightly skeptical at first on some of this as to how much is hype and so on. And there's probably still some of that. But the results here are real. And this is very exciting. So Ajay, maybe you can describe your approach as to the tools that you're using and how that is going to lead us to hopefully resistant free new drugs.
Sure, thanks, Alex. And we definitely want to be part of this platinum age as well. So, I'm just going back to what Ken was saying. It's been over 50 years since a new class of gram-negative has been discovered. So, not in my lifetime, many of your lifetimes, has there been a new gram-negative antibiotic being developed. And so, what we've done is we've basically gone back to the beginning. We want to understand the biology of bacteria with billions of years of evolution and getting an intimate knowledge of what goes on in bacteria. And we've got the tools now. So you mentioned artificial intelligence, machine learning, and we've got the tools there, and we've got systems biology approaches as well. So we've married systems biology, machine learning to fill in the gaps, and wet lab biology to get a really intimate understanding of the processes that take place in bacterial cells. So we've initially focused on the outer wall of bacteria, of gram-negative bacteria, which is made up of 3 components. And using that knowledge, we've made one of the most detailed models of the outer wall of bacteria. And what we do then is look at vulnerabilities in those different interconnected pathways. So if you push down on one part, what happens over there in another part of the network? And so we can use computer power to do that now and find out how the bacteria can bypass these pathways. So using that knowledge, we can then select what we call better targets. The targets might not get bypassed as easily, might be more sensitive. So we really get down to understanding all that network. So we've, as I said, we initially focused on this outer envelope that you find in gram-negative bacteria, and we found some great targets, and then we start to develop chemistry against those targets. This is obviously a long process, so and for a small biotech, it's quite tough as well, because we've got limited funds, and but we're all excited about the science. We're very passionate about the science, and my co-founder John, who's probably online as well, using this method, he's actually found new biology as well, discovered new biology using these methods, and so we really believe in our approach, and we really believe that these tools can help in the future. So what we've got is we've got some very early stage assets. We've identified these targets using this model. We proved experimentally that these targets are good, and now we're developing drugs against those targets. I mean, the issue for us, as you can imagine, for many early stage biotechs in this field, is that there's very little interest from the farmers, from the investors in this field. And the whole topic today is the discussion why that is, and I think we know why. So it's really tough for a small biotech like us to make progress in the antibacterial field, and we've got to be creative, and it's for those reasons we've actually, we're passionate about the antibacterial work, but we're also working on modeling mammalian pathways as well to work on exciting cancer pathways as well. So it's all a case of being creative and trying to get past those first few hurdles where we can attract the attention of the Roches and the Mercks and the Novos, etc. So yeah, it's tough, but I think we've got the tools. We've proven, we're on our way to proving that we can go from machine learning model, identify a target, show the target's good, then develop active chemical matters against the target. So yeah, I think we're getting there. We're proving it. Yeah.
I think you probably know the E. coli better than anybody on the planet, I would assume.
Yes, our model's based on the E. coli. So we've actually, as I said, we started off with the modeling the outer envelope, and now we're moving to a whole cell model based purely on machine learning. And this is down to my co-founder, who's the brains behind John George, is the brains behind the modeling work.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And we look very much forward to see those turn into drugs. I think, as you said, still early, but you're laying the foundation really for how to do this. Thank you for that. Let's jump over to Paul, who is doing something similar but very different, sort of same philosophy perhaps, but using very different technology. So Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Aleks. Yeah, I think that's right. As AJ was saying, what we're aiming to do as a small biotech company in the UK is really to find our niche where we can do something that we think will be really innovative and useful and helpful, but within the context of a small company rather than a pharma. So it's a very pragmatic approach, building on what we've done historically and exploiting that hopefully to the best effect in the antibacterial area. So our company has a long history of developing computer-aided drug design methods. It was founded by Professor Graham Richards, who's one of the founding fathers of computational chemistry and computer-aided drug design. So we've got a strong background in what you might call traditional methods, and are using that as a platform to build in these newer methods coming from AI and machine learning, and trying to take things that have been developed in other domains and apply them in our domain of chemistry and drug design. So just one example of that is looking at some novel sort of mathematics in topology and topological data analysis, to get into the underlying structure of data and then integrate that into our broader sort of suite of computational chemistry platforms. And I think you made a comment in your introduction about AI, about distinguishing the hype from what's real. And I think for us, to make these, I agree with you that these methods have great promise and they're beginning to show that promise in reality. And the important thing for that is really to combine the computer science expertise with the drug discovery expertise. And it's only if you put those two things together that you can actually make good use of those methods. So that's what we're trying to do as a pragmatic tool. And to prove that that works, we have initiated a portfolio of programs, which again, we're trying to do something that we can do, where we can make a difference. So we're looking at novel targets. We're looking at trying to leverage that and use our design methods to design compounds with a low propensity to resistance. We're focused on developing compounds that have oral activity. Again, in order to try to hit this sort of sweet spot where we can actually make a difference and deliver a compound that's actually attractive for the science, but also has some commercial perspective as well. And in our lead project, we've been very lucky to be able to get funding from Carbex and from the UK government to advance that program. We're also looking at one or two other sort of slightly different aspects. We're looking at veterinary applications and whether we can develop some things that could be used in that market in order to, again, with the resistance perspective, find things that will be useful for veterinary application, but which don't have the risk of increasing resistance burden in medicines that are used to treat human disease. So again, trying to do something pragmatic, something that's really useful, something that exploits the modern science, but in areas that we can do something distinctive from larger farmers or big biotechs. You're muted.
I am muted. So there is a question out here to Ken as to commercial viability, and which really also goes to value. How do we assess value in the antibiotic field these days? And also, while Ken is thinking about that, I'd love to invite any other questions to come in via the chat. You click on the little bubble chat on the bottom and you can type in your question. And maybe also, Ken, in your response to how we assess commercial value, maybe you can also begin to tee up a little bit as to the concept of reimbursement reform that I'd like to come into after your answer.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to start with the patient on that one, right? So for us, that's where it all starts, is where is the unmet medical need? And what is the science that supports that? For us, thinking about the increase in resistance that we're seeing in the gram-negatives, the hospital-associated infections, the HAP, the VAP, for example, being large areas of unmet medical need. And I think that's where we need to start thinking about the patients. And then we layer on the reality of what is the business associated with that. And right now, we understand that there are business challenges, market challenges associated with antibiotics, and things like push incentives that we talked about before help to address that in one way, but it's only part of it. I think what's going to be necessary for a larger solution, right? And part of that is going to be changes in reimbursement, as you've just alluded to, pull incentives, and really just a different way of thinking about the business case around antibiotics as a drug class. And so I think part of our solution is to work right now on the medical problem, working on what the patients need, and at the same time actively engaging in the discussions in terms of how do we address the reforms that are necessary to fix the broken business model.
Thank you, Ken. Any perspectives on this from the rest of the panel?
I could make a comment, Alex, if that's okay.
Please, Paul.
I think the work around the pull incentives are very important, and it's clearly going to be very difficult, I think, for the sort of multinational, international collaboration that will be needed to really get those to work. And up until now, I've been a little bit skeptical about whether any of the fine words will actually be converted into action. But I'm a little bit more positive now. I think the UK actually has been one of the countries that has thought about this more than many. And although there's much to be worked through, I think some of the recent government announcements about reimbursement schemes and paying for access to antibiotics rather than by use, it's a baby, an early step, but I think there is some encouragement there that that this talk will convert into reality.
I could add to that. I think that pull incentives are important, and they have to be just part of the solution. Push is part of it, but I also think, and we believe very strongly at Sparrow, that we have to be part of the solution as well. And so independent of incentives, we need to build pipelines that can meet these more than part way. And I think that one of the things that, I think you started the panel with humility. We have to have the humility to realize that not everything we develop that, in anti-infectives is clinically necessary or commercially viable, but everything we develop, there are things that we can develop that are both clinically necessary and commercially viable. I think that we have a responsibility as drug developers to start there. And, it certainly breaks my heart as a clinician that not everything that I see that patients need is yet commercially viable. And that's where pull incentives come into fore. And I also think that as we started this call talking about the threats that we haven't seen yet, I think you're absolutely right, Alex, that it is just chance that it's a coronavirus that we're contending with as a society. It could have been any other infectious agent that transmits from person to person and replicates well. The value of pull incentives, in my opinion, is giving us the latitude to be better prepared. And as we figured out as a society, we can't start from zero. We have to have had a running start. And that's why the folks on this call have a responsibility, because we've been running at this for some time. So, in my view, pull incentives are important. There's never been more momentum around them, both the subscription models that have been discussed in the UK, as well as acts like Pasteur and Disarm. However, we have a responsibility to choose wisely to really leverage for society the full benefit of these types of investments. You can't start from zero. You have to have had a vision in this. You have to have the right talent and systems. Plus, in my opinion, a government incentive alone won't be enough. You have to have a sustainable pipeline to start.
Thank you, Ankit. And I think there was a question in the Q&A, which I had not seen. So I thought it was all in the chat, so apologies. But I've now seen the questions. First question was, how does the VC community view the value here? And as I think most people know, the VC community has diminished significantly over the last few years. I think it's been about a 70% reduction in private money going into the space over the last 3 years or so. And just from my side of things, the message that I used to hear a lot was simply that these hospital drugs that were being reimbursed under the DRGs was just not sustainable, given that if you put a higher price, you're essentially just taking them out of the hospital pocket. And as a consequence, you were going to face, at best, slow adoption into people dragging their feet to do anything, even if it was the best drug ever. And so there are several new payment reimbursement mechanisms out there, one of which is a decoupling of payment from DRGs. And then there is another, which is a subscription model from governments to create a pull incentive to essentially reward success. And from the folks that I speak with, I think everybody would be extremely happy with either of those solutions. And if even better would be both. And so I do find it fairly critical that some of that happens because Ankit's point as to, yes, it's possible that some of the mechanisms that all of the folks on the phone or on the call here are pursuing are novel enough that they may prove themselves to be different, sufficiently different. That is going to take several years before those more novel molecules get to market. And in the meantime, we're going to have VCs sitting on their hands saying, yeah, I will wait for that. So what we do need are some governmental change of reimbursement in the short term in order to turn things around. And so in that regard, I think several of you have seen the UK effort. There's an effort in Sweden, and there are some opportunities in the US as well, potentially as part of COVID legislation. And I think some of the critical facts here are, so A, there's a burning platform, which is great. But a lot of the things that we've talked about here are critical for that, which is to define what is novel. Because we want to pay for effective life-saving drugs. And to a great degree, that because of the resistance problem, that means novel. And so we have to define that. And I think we are making huge strides very, very quickly to define what it is that we as society and taxpayers should be thrilled to pay for. And Ken's perspective as to, specifically making that preparedness, and to Ankit's point, it does need to be fairly broad-based. It doesn't work to have one drug when any one of these pathogens could rear its ugly head and kill hundreds of thousands of people. So we do need to have a vibrant community with a diversity of molecules, not just the few surviving companies. It is simply not good enough what we have today. So on this front, I'd love to get the panel's perspective as to the importance of novel and how we define it. Maybe, anyone want to raise their hand?
I think.
Ken? Good. Sorry, Ken was unmuted first. That's good. All right.
Yeah, I think novelty for me, our litmus test is really not novelty just because it's novel or different or new. It really comes down to, are you overcoming pre-existing resistance mechanisms? And again, if we even take a step back from that, are you offering something new to patients? Are you able to provide a treatment for an organism that is resistant to the current standard of care? And so if we think about what is the value to patient, they have a treatment now that they didn't have before. And I think that's what drives our interest in novelty.
Ajay?
Yeah, I was just going to add. I completely agree with what Ken was saying, but going back to the subscription models, the UK are trialing subscription model, as you know. I think the key here is that it's not going to work if it's just the UK. It needs, you know, multiple countries to join in. The key G20 countries must be part of the solution. So I think at the moment it seems very fragmented. You know, the US have got ideas, Sweden we've got ideas. So I think we need some sort of coordinated effort to address this issue and come up with these solutions. I think that's very hard to do because of each country have their own ideas, and a lot of them will just be sitting back and waiting to see how the UK model develops. So I think I think that is a big problem. Basically, I don't know what the solution is, but I think that's going to slow that process down, and hence slow the investment down, or for the innovation that's desperately required as well.
Anyone else?
Alex, I'd like to make a comment on the novelty point. Well, not directly on the novelty point. Again, everything Ken says is absolutely right. Meeting patients with an unmet medical need. So I think the point I'd make is that one has to combine that novelty with other important factors if the medicine's actually going to make a difference. And I think a couple of the speakers and I mentioned earlier, developing compounds with oral activity, and I think that's another important point. The novelty has to also be in the context of the other properties of the molecule that are also important for both it to treat patients and for it to treat a sufficiently large patient population that it can be commercially successful. So it's novelty together with other things, I think, that will make the difference between compounds that really make a difference and those that don't.
Great. From my own side of things, and I think there are a couple of questions out here that actually go at this. I think we usually define novel as free of resistance, and so that could be a new class, a new target, or a new mechanism, essentially. I think that's what the WHO solves. But I think there are some pretty good comments out here as to also either new modalities or other directions altogether, such as antivirulence factors and vaccines, cell therapies, and so on. I would say that to the community, when we started the Repair Impact Fund a couple of years ago, I think we were particularly excited about the potential for a lot of those potential therapies and really different ways of approaching the market. I have also been humbled over the years here to look and see that as I think really innovative some of those things are, actually developing those therapies into a real working antibiotic is harder than at least I initially believed. And as a consequence, the approach with small molecules that I think several of the panelists here are representing is probably going to be the mainstay of antibiotic development, at least for some period still, hopefully augmented by all of these other things. But I think there are some things in the pipeline, but it's still not a huge amount. And we do need to see a few further proof points on that. I see, Sunil, you're back, which is great. Maybe also as an investor in the space, I would love to see or hear your view on all of this and value.
Yeah, well, I think what we hope is that through the disaster that we've had in COVID-19 and the pandemic, and make people realize that actually we need to support this particular part of the therapeutic industry. It's a shame for Ajay, who's got a great platform, to be thinking about doing other things in the oncology space when he has developed a great platform for the antibiotic space. Oxford Drug Design which have a great platform to develop anything that happen to have a program which is an oral antibiotic, speeding through towards the clinic with a huge CARB-X award. And it's a shame for him to be thinking about, should we use our platform? And we have these discussions at the board. It's like, are we sustainable as an antibiotic company, or do we need to think about other drug targets? And you've got, great talent with ODD, Oxford Drug Design, and Biotech. And we had the questions on the board: can we survive as an antibiotic company? And I think it kind of leads into a question: is for the smaller biotechs, unlike Ankit, who's swishing around on NASDAQ in a pool of Boston money, for the UK biotechs, it's quite tricky. And we rely, I think, much more on the collaborative deals with big pharma to survive in the biotech industry in the UK. We don't have a liquid market where we can IPO. Really, AIM is just, it's nowhere to be seen in biotech, really. So it's just why I was really interested to see what Ken's opinion was on how they value antibiotics. And do we think that COVID-19 will make other pharma realize, actually, we actually have developed a department now for antivirals. They probably never had one earlier. All their top brass and research is going into this area right now. And if you want to talk to them about anything in this space, you get through to, the number one or number two in the company. Do we think other big pharma would follow suit with, reopening their antiviral departments again, which they've pretty much closed over the last 5-10 years? Do we see a rush of, we need to have something in this space now, maybe hopefully for economic good, and we can see a change in the UK and Sweden, hopefully the FDA will follow suit? Or is it just because they think it's socially the right thing to do, which will really help our fundamental research base? So it's kind of, that's where we see it. We're hoping that the tide will turn, and when it turns, we're sitting there with a couple of clinical assets in our biotechs. So it's a question to Ken and maybe Alex, who are probably more than know, and maybe Ankit, who's probably closer to some of the big pharma as well. I haven't seen it happen yet, but I think, and I feel that the discussions are being had as should we support the space further? And a little bit towards Roche is, why is Roche supporting the space? Are they doing it altruistically, or they realize actually there are elements of it which actually are very commercially viable?
Yeah, and specifically about antibiotics, and I can't speak to whether this will inspire other pharma companies to reinvest in the area, but I can say that it has been something that has really made it real for us in infectious disease department here in Roche. Not that it wasn't real already. I mean, we are very passionate and really believe that there's a need for antibiotics and antivirals. We're invested in both. So COVID-19, I think, helps us talk more generally across the organization as to really, showing the immediate need for anti-infectives, and really as Alex started off with, the boiling frog analogy is a quite nice one, right? So I'm going to take that back. So you can have Platinum Age, and I'm going to take boiling frog back. But I think it's really important for us to understand, again, taking it back to the patients, understanding that there are millions of patients affected every year by multi-drug resistant bacterial infections, and that's really the drive for us coming back into this space. Roche had exited antibiotics in the late 1990s and got back in about 6 or 7 years ago. And so for us, seeing the growing need that there was the impetus for us jumping back into this field.
And I guess the same question to you, Alex, is, because you're investing a huge amount in this space. Is it? I know you have a foundation at Novo. Is this kind of an altruistic foundation type? We need to do the right thing, or is this actually we see this turning?
Yeah, and as much money as we're pouring in here is a small amount compared to what's necessary here. But I think we're pretty blessed with this really long horizon as a private investor. And so we're actually still very optimistic on the long term. I think we have been humbled on the short term very much, that things have been worse or gotten worse faster than we expected. So yes, there is an altruistic aspect in it, in that we're not making, or we were not expecting to make a return in the short term. But we think that that platinum age is still out there. And there was somebody on here that asked, why are not more VCs not seeing this turning? Why the bottom might be here now? So we do need a few catalysts to make that bottom clear. And I think COVID may be a part of that signal to the world that this is a viable long-term investment, in that society is ready to pay for preparedness and to actually pay more than a couple of $1,000s to save a productive member of society. So as I think time is over, Sunil, I'd love to just end with a quick lightning round for the panel, picking up on the platinum age here, as to say to the community at large, how do we promote that new moniker, platinum age, to VCs? We're all in, so you don't have to sell me on this. But how do we sell everybody else on this? Maybe Ankit, you're off mute, so we'll start with you.
Sure, and Ken and Alex, I owe you both a pithy catchphrase, so I'll borrow yours for now. My opinion is, and going back to the prior question, we engage a broader community on the merits of the medicines, and ideally, they are both commercially sustainable and they're doing something important for society. And I think that the responsibility for us, and we continue to have these dialogues with a range of collaborators, because that's how we built our business, is on the merits of these programs. And so our view is, how do we get people a broader circle? Number one is find those programs that are both commercially sustainable and clinically necessary, and then build outwards from there. And we've had gained traction by having discussions on the merits of those programs and then building outward from there. And so I think that along with good policy and heightened social awareness, we have a responsibility to choose the right programs.
Great, Ajay.
Just to add, going back to the pharma question that Sunil was talking about, I think big pharma are willing to get back into the field. I mean, you saw how quickly AstraZeneca, for example, helped out with the Oxford group. You've seen how the Merck group have just acquired a vaccine company and done a deal with Ridgeback. So I think there is scope for these big pharmas to get back into the field, and when they do, they can move pretty quickly. So yeah, I'm leaving on an optimistic note there. So when these guys move, they can move fast, and that'll be good for everyone, I think.
Paul?
Yeah, I of course agree with what's been said. So I think for me, we just have to continue to plug away at just raising the awareness of the value that these molecules and these therapies bring to people. And it's a long slog. I know people have been trying to do that for quite some time, as we try to move governments towards pull incentives and so on. But I think that is working to some degree, and we must just maintain our efforts there to just ram home how valuable these compounds and treatments are for antibacterial bacterial diseases, and that will also help shift the tide, I think.
Ken?
Yeah, thank you. And I think, for me, differentiated medicines is where we need to be, right? Antibiotics really enabled modern medicine. They've saved untold number of lives. And we want to make sure that we have the long view that the generation after us has access to that same benefit from antibiotics. And so investing now in medicines that are truly differentiated is how we're going to show value. And that value I think is more than just for patients. I think we can find a way to bring that to market.
Great, and I think my last point is that exactly that value that I think has been told now from all of our panels, we can do a better job actually communicating to the general public. And right now is the time to do it. So Neil, thanks for inviting all of us. Back to you. You're on mute.
Thanks for all of you guys. I just want to have the final say because I'm allowed to. I really appreciate Ankit's point actually earlier, is that you've got to find a way of working on projects which are commercially tractable in this current environment. And hopefully things will change and make it even more attractive. So it's, I'm on the board of ODD, as I mentioned, and, look, last week we had Exudate and J&J on the call, and we were talking about a market size of like 5 or 10 billion. And, Paul's drug it's not that level, but it's still got a market size of something like 1 billion on this current level. So you've got to find your niches and gaps and formulate them accordingly to fill that. If the space that he's in, it's oral for a community infection. It's still a huge market. And so you've just got to find the angles and niches. I think it's good value for VCs to get in now. I'm not saying we're bottom feeders, but it's very cost effective to invest in antibiotic companies at the moment. So as a small investor, we are taking advantage of that, and hopefully we can see values change as the government dynamics change as well. So on that note, I want to thank all of you. It's been probably one of the best panels that we've had on here. And really appreciate all of your time from wherever you are in the world, from Denmark, from Boston, from Oxford, and wherever AJ is. He moves around London, I think, today. Thank you very much. Goodbye.